Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into India's past, looking at it through two quite different lenses.
That's right. We've got excerpts from Jawaharlal Nehru's Discovery of India, which is very personal, almost philosophical in parts.
Yeah, reflective. And then we have a chapter on the Swarajists from Bipin Chandra's History of Modern India. Much more focused historical analysis there.
Exactly. So you get Nehru's, broader reflections shaped by his own life and thinking, even his time in prison.
Contrasted with Chandra's more specific look at a key political development in the nationalist movement.
It's a great pairing, actually.
It is. So our mission here, for you, the listener, is to go beyond just the sequence of events. We want to dig into the insights, understand the complexities, how India's history unfolded, how it dealt with outside influences, the beginnings of that drive for self-rule.
And connects some of those maybe surprising historical threads to the India we see today, giving you that richer picture.
Okay, so let's jump in. Nehru starts with this interesting idea about action and thought, right? Even being in prison, thinking deeply, is a kind of preparation for action.
Mm-hmm. It's his idea that life is this constant flow between reflection and engagement.
Yeah.
And he sees history itself in that light.
How so?
Well, the past isn't just done and dusted. It flows directly into the present, shaping it. And what we do now, our actions and thoughts, they create the future. It's all connected.
Continuous stream. It makes you think about the deep roots of so many things in contemporary India, doesn't it?
Absolutely. But then he introduces a more challenging idea, this concept of a progressive deterioration in India over many centuries.
Right, that's a big one. What exactly does he mean by deterioration here?
Well, it's not like a total collapse, but more a gradual fading of vitality in certain areas, a loss of dynamism maybe.
He gives some pretty specific examples, doesn't he?
He does. Things like original rebellious thought becoming just commentary on older texts, or magnificent art turning into work that's technically perfect but, lacks life or spirit.
And language, too.
Yeah, vigorous language getting bogged down in overly ornate, complex styles. And then adventurous spirit that spread Indian culture far and wide, turning inwards, becoming a kind of narrow orthodoxy.
He even suggests rational inquiry got pushed aside by irrationalism and just worshiping the past without question, leading to what he calls a sluggish stream of Indian life.
It's quite a strong critique. And the takeaway for you, perhaps, is thinking about how societies can sometimes lose momentum if they only look backward.
But he does add a caveat, right? He says this isn't the whole story.
Crucially, yes. He's very clear that this is one perspective, one trend he observed, but not the complete picture, because alongside this, something else was incredibly strong.
Which leads him to the enduring cultural background of the masses.
Exactly. Despite whatever was happening at the elite or political level, there was this incredibly deep and resilient cultural foundation for ordinary people.
How did that manifest?
Through everything, really. Popular philosophy, traditions, shared stories, myths, legends. It was all woven into the fabric of daily life.
He talks a lot about the epics, the Ramayana and Mahabharata.
Their popular versions were known everywhere. The stories, the characters, the moral lessons, they were common currency, even for people who couldn't read.
He mentions villagers knowing hundreds of verses by heart.
Yeah, and using them in conversation. Imagine that level of cultural literacy, just absorbed from the environment. It speaks to this incredible resilience, doesn't it?
It really does, a powerful continuity, even when other things seem to be in decline. So let's go even further back. Nehru touches on the ancient roots of Indian thought in the Vedas.
Right. He traces that evolution from polytheism, many gods, towards monism, the idea of one underlying reality, and even monotheism within those very early texts.
And the Rig Veda itself. Possibly the oldest book we have.
Quite possibly. And it's not just hymns. He points out the spirit of inquiry, of questioning, that's already present there.
He quotes Dr. McNichol about India's long quest to understand the world and human life.
It's a reminder that this deep philosophical thinking goes back an incredibly long way. Civilized life and thought existed even before the Rig Veda.
Wow. Okay, then he moves on to a really complex topic. The caste system. How does he frame its origins?
He suggests it might have emerged as a kind of pragmatic, maybe even peaceful solution after the Aryan arrival, a way to organize society based on different functions or specializations.
But it wasn't always rigid.
No, he argues the initial divisions were likely more fluid. The real rigidity, the hereditary aspect, came later. He also mentions how indigenous tribes were absorbed, often into the Shudra category.
And that people could potentially change caste. like gaining Kshatriya status through power.
Yes, that possibility existed, suggesting it wasn't always completely fixed. And interestingly, the word Arya itself changed meaning over time, from a racial term to just meaning noble.
That shift in meaning is fascinating, shows how things evolve. Now, what about India's interaction with the outside world? This seems key to Nehru.
Absolutely central. He emphasizes India's remarkable ability to absorb foreign elements and create something new, a synthesis. The Indo-Aryan culture itself is his prime example.
So even invasions, which were obviously disruptive.
Right, they shook things up politically and culturally, but India often managed to integrate the newcomers and their ideas over time.
He mentions Brahmanism or Hinduism rising as a kind of nationalist symbol in response to some of these influences.
And contrast that with Buddhism, which, though born in India, had a more inherently international outlook.
And his point is that foreign groups really only had a lasting impact if they became part of India's own diverse culture.
Exactly. They had to participate, share, become interwoven. Otherwise, they tended to fade away. This capacity for synthesis is a major theme.
He specifically highlights one very ancient connection with Iran.
Yes, a relationship going back even before the Indo-Aryan civilization, rooted in a common ancestral stock.
With links in race, religion.
Vedic religion and Zoroastrianism sharing common ground, yeah. And language too, Vedic Sanskrit and Avestan being closely related. Though he notes their different environments led their cultures and art down somewhat different paths eventually.
Still a remarkably deep and long-lasting connection. Okay, moving forward in time, let's talk about Sanskrit literature. Nehru seems quite impressed by its flourishing.
He is. He gives examples like Vishakadatta's play, Muda Rakshasa, apparently quite a political drama for its time, set during Chandragupta Maurya's era.
And rulers themselves writing plays like King Harsha.
Yes, and he mentions Bhavuti, considered second only to the great Kalidasa, praising the sheer beauty and power of his language. He even quotes Wilson on the musicality and grandeur of their verse.
It paints a picture of a really vibrant literary scene that lasted for centuries.
Definitely. The fact that Sanskrit drama continued for so long speaks volumes.
And the resilience of Sanskrit itself, even when Persian became the court language later on.
Right. Sanskrit didn't just disappear. It continued to be studied and used, though Nehru suggests the quality might have declined somewhat over time.
He brings up Dr. F.F. Thomas's view of Sanskrit as a unifying force.
Yeah, and Thomas even suggested a basic Sanskrit as a potential common language for India, which is quite something. And Max Miller's point about its marvelous continuity, comparing its reach to Latin in medieval Europe.
It really underscores its historical significance. Okay, let's shift focus slightly to Buddhism and Jainism. Nehru sees them as breakaways from the Vedic tradition.
And he highlights Buddha's emphasis on ethics, on conduct, over getting bogged down in, complex metaphysical debates. Though he notes the Upanishads had already criticized priestcraft and caste earlier.
He talks about the interaction between Brahmanism and Buddhism, how they influenced each other.
Right, especially the Mahayana school of Buddhism, which started to look more like Brahminical systems in some ways. You even had Brahmanism incorporating Buddha as an avatar, and Buddhism, in turn, deifying Buddha.
But he also sees a kind of decline or divergence in Mahayana Buddhism.
Yes, as it spread, he suggests it lost some of its distinctiveness, maybe its vitality. Monasteries became wealthy, discipline potentially slackened, and elements of magic or superstition crept into popular worship.
He quotes Mrs. Rhys Davids describing Buddhism in India after its first 1,000 years as being in a diseased state.
It's a strong statement, suggesting the core ethical teachings got a bit lost under layers of other things.
Okay, fast forwarding again. The encounter with Islamic culture, starting with the Afghans and Turks.
And here we see that theme of synthesis again. New customs arrive. There are reactions, periods of conflict, sure, but also attempts at understanding.
Like al-Biruni in the 11th century.
Exactly. An outsider observing and trying to understand India, though Nehru notes al-Biruni was also critical of what he saw as Indian pride and isolationism.
It's always interesting to get those external perspectives. Now, the practice of purdah, the seclusion of women, how did that evolve according to Nehru?
He points out that strict seclusion wasn't really a feature of early Islamic society in India. It seems to have grown more prevalent during Mughal times, becoming a status symbol for both Hindus and Muslims in certain areas.
Which areas mainly?
Mostly northern and eastern regions, Delhi, the United Provinces, Rajputana, Bihar, Bengal. But interestingly, it was less strict in heavily Muslim areas, like Punjab and the frontier province.
And largely absent in the South and West?
Generally, yes, except among some specific Muslim communities. So lots of regional variation. It wasn't uniform at all.
That's important context. What about the overall nature of society and the economy before the British arrived?
Nehru challenges the idea that it was all about wealth accumulation in the way we think of it now. Caste status didn't perfectly align with riches. Brahmins, high status, often weren't wealthy. Merchants might be rich but didn't have the top social standing.
And land ownership.
Mostly agricultural. He says it wasn't really like the landlord or peasant proprietor systems we know today. It was more about how the produce of the land was distributed, shares for the cultivators, the state, various village functionaries.
A different kind of economic arrangement. Okay, let's talk about Akbar. Nehru clearly sees his reign as a high point.
Definitely. A key period of synthesis. He highlights Akbar's efforts to integrate, even while fighting, like with Rana Pratap subduing him but respecting his spirit.
And his court was famously diverse, right?
Absolutely. A brilliant gathering of people from different faiths, fostering new ideas, art, architecture. His religious tolerance and attempts at a synthetic faith are well known.
Nehru feels this period really solidified the Mughal dynasty as Indian, not foreign.
Yes, a major step in Hindu-Muslim cultural fusion, especially in North India. Akbar became popular across communities.
And this led to lots of shared culture.
Over time, yes. Nehru talks about common traits developing in habits, food, clothes, arts, pastimes. People living together, sharing festivals, language, facing similar economic issues. A sophisticated common culture developed, particularly among the nobility.
Even with the caste system still in place.
Even with that,
Yeah.
there was significant cultural exchange happening.
Okay, so then, the British. How did they manage to dominate? Nehru initially suggests it was almost accidental.
He does float that idea, fortuitous circumstances and lucky flukes. And he acknowledges the British did suffer defeats against Indian powers sometimes. It wasn't a simple walkover.
But then he digs deeper.
Right. He looks at the underlying factors and suggests there was a kind of inevitability given the situation. A key difference was the British professionalism versus the often more personal, sometimes adventurous methods of Indian rulers.
He mentions the East India Company's administration.
Yeah, Edward Thompson's quote about their secretariat being exceptionally efficient. Plus, Nehru points to the British use of, well, less savory methods, bribery, corruption, and excellent spy network.
And crucially, the fifth column.
Yes, defectors within Indian ranks who helped the British. He argues some battles, like Plassey, were practically won through manipulation before the fighting even started.
A combination of organization, ruthlessness, and exploiting divisions. He mentions Ranjit Singh of Punjab as an interesting figure.
Yes, the founder of the Sikh kingdom. He quotes Jacquemont, calling Ranjit Singh extremely brave, but also almost the first inquisitive Indian I have seen.
Why inquisitive? What's the contrast?
Nehru suggests many Indian intellectuals were quite reserved, perhaps reluctant to engage deeply with the sort of foreign adventurers the British often dealt with. The British, he implies, mostly met opportunists or corrupt officials, not the intellectual core. Ranjit Singh seemed different, curious.
Interesting point. Okay, the economic impact. The plunder of Bengal and its connection to the Industrial Revolution.
Nehru connects the dots. The company gets footholds, Surat, Madras, Bombay, Calcutta. Then Plassey in 1757 gives them control over vast, wealthy areas.
And this wealth flowed back to Britain.
Significantly. But he also highlights a devastating impact within India. British policies actually reversed the normal shift from agriculture to industry. India became more dependent on agriculture.
Deindustrialization, essentially.
Yes. A few big cities grew, but overall economic stagnation, even decline, masked by that. And this wasn't accidental. He argues the British actively obstructed Indian industrial growth.
How so?
By protecting British industries. India had resources, skills, but the government actively opposed Indian manufacturing. Even during the World Wars, Indian industrial potential was deliberately held back.
He mentions the 1935 Constitution Act.
Explicitly preventing Indian legislatures from doing anything that might harm British industrial interests, a systematic suppression.
Now, the East India Company itself had a strange status, didn't it?
Very peculiar. Initially, it wasn't technically acting for the British Crown or Parliament, but as an agent of the fading Mughal emperor in Delhi.
So Parliament wasn't directly involved.
Only periodically, like when renewing the company's charter. The Diwani grant the right to collect revenue made the company financially pretty independent of London.
And Indian wars were paid for with Indian money.
Largely, yes. Money raised and controlled by the company in India. A very unusual setup.
Let's talk about the princely states and the subsidiary system.
Right. Some states, like Mysore, were basically created by the British after defeating prior rulers. Nepal was really the only truly independent one.
And the subsidiary system, what was that?
Essentially, Indian rulers kept their thrones but gave up real power. The British residents stationed in their court held the actual authority, often acting like the state's chief minister.
So the ruler was responsible on paper, but powerless in practice.
Exactly. Nehru quotes Henry Lawrence and Thomas Monroe, both critical of this system, saying it inevitably led to bad government because the ruler had responsibility without power.
A recipe for problems. Okay, shifting to Western culture and education. How did that come in?
Nehru credits missionaries and some individual Englishmen initially. Interestingly, he says the British government itself was often wary, fearing education might spread dangerous ideas.
So early efforts were often independent.
Yes,
Yeah.
individuals gathering students, introducing English literature, Western thought. Eventually, the government needed clerks, so education grew slowly, but they remained cautious.
Nehru acknowledges it was limited, maybe skewed, but still opened minds.
Yes, it provided exposure to new ideas, even if imperfectly. He also notes the British were suspicious of things like the printing press and machinery, too.
Potential tools for dissent. How did this impact Hindus and Muslims differently, particularly in Bengal early on?
He observes that some upper-class Hindus in Bengal were quite attracted to Western ideas, even Christianity, leading to reform movements like the Brahmo Samaj, led by Raja Rammohan Roy.
But not the masses. And what about Muslims?
The impact on the Hindu masses was limited initially, and Muslims, he notes, largely kept aloof from the new English education system, which unfortunately led to them falling behind economically later on.
This led to a difference in leadership emerging.
Yes, he points to many brilliant Hindu figures emerging in 19th century Bengal, but a relative lack of prominent Muslim Bengali leaders in that specific sphere during that time.
But at the grassroots level,
He emphasizes that ordinary Hindus and Muslims in Bengal were often very similar habits, language, shared poverty. He also notes many Bengali Muslims were converts from lower Hindu strata.
so complex dynamics, all this leads towards growing discontent, culminating in the 1857 revolt.
Right. Bengal had sort of adapted, but elsewhere, especially the upper provinces, resentment was growing. Anti-British feeling was widespread among the masses and the old feudal chiefs.
What fueled it?
Arrogant behavior by foreigners, the greed of company officials, the confusing and often unjust new legal system. Sir Thomas Monroe had warned about these negative impacts much earlier.
Nehru highlights the leaders of the revolt.
Yes, figures like Nana Sahib, the skilled Tantia Topi who was sadly betrayed, and especially Lakshmi Bai, the Rani of Jhansi.
She's remembered as a great hero, isn't she?
Absolutely. Nehru mentions even the English general admired her bravery. She's a powerful symbol of resistance.
And the British justification for their rule after this.
The narrative was they were bringing order, good government, to a chaotic India. Underpinned, Nehru says, by a strong belief in their own racial superiority and destiny to rule, the civilizing mission idea.
How did they adjust their ruling technique after 1857?
The revolt, while having some nationalist sparks, was mainly feudal. The British realized they needed allies, so they shifted policy to favor the princes and big landlords, the Talukars, seeing them as pillars to support their rule.
Even reinstating some who had rebelled.
Yes, if they pledged loyalty.
Yeah.
A strategic move to solidify control by co-opting the traditional elites.
Okay, let's switch gears now to Bipin Chandra and the Swarajists. This is after the withdrawal of the non-cooperation movement. What was the situation in the Congress?
Chandra describes it as a period of disintegration, disorganization. Enthusiasm had waned after the movement was called off. There was disillusionment, discouragement.
And disagreements among leaders.
Serious differences, yes, about what to do next. The old strategy seemed stalled.
And this is where C.R. Das and Motilal Nehru come in.
Exactly. They proposed a new approach and the boycott of the legislative councils. Get inside them and use them as a new front for the political struggle.
A pretty radical shift in tactics.
It was a major debate within Congress, a real turning point in strategy.
Let's circle back to Nehru for a moment, thinking about Gandhi's influence. Nehru sees it as immense.
Profound, yes. He says Gandhi influenced everyone, even those who disagreed with him. His big contribution was bringing this moral dimension, this ethical approach to politics and daily life.
Tempering expediency with morality.
Right. Taking a longer view, considering the ethics, it changed the tone of politics. Nehru also clarifies Congress's stance on a couple of things: village industries versus big industry. Yeah.
Congress championed village industries under Gandhi, definitely, but Nehru stresses they weren't opposed to big industries. They supported Indian ones like Tata Steel when they could. The conflict was usually with the government favoring British interests, like in shipping.
And nonviolence, was it absolute for Congress? Internally, for the freedom struggle, yes. But Nehru explains the Congress Working Committee couldn't accept Gandhi's absolute nonviolence for external relations, especially during World War II. They eventually reached a compromise formula for how a free India would handle defense and foreign policy.
Which brings us to World War II itself. Congress offered cooperation.
Yes, but if the British formed a genuine national government, the British refused.
Which strengthened the feeling that British rule was just holding India back.
Exactly, degrading and weakening the country. The argument became, Indian freedom isn't just for India, it's a test case for the Allies' claims and an inspiration for other colonies.
So Congress proposed a provisional government.
To defend India and start work on a constitution. But the British response to this, and the subsequent Quit India movement, was swift and harsh.
Mass arrests, suppression.
Total crackdown. Gandhi and the entire Congress leadership arrested. The Viceroy took complete control. Propaganda silenced critics in Britain and America. Nehru notes a kind of self-righteousness grew in Britain about their role in India.
Looking ahead, Nehru connects many of independent India's problems back to this period.
He talks about arrested growth. British rule prevented normal adjustments. He thought the princely states issue was solvable without the British factor. The minorities problem, though, he saw as uniquely complex, with blame on multiple sides, including Indians.
And British policy favored the status quo.
Yes, aiming to preserve the existing order, often by encouraging more backward-looking groups. Progress was held hostage to the agreement of reactionaries. He argued India needed a constitution reflecting current social forces, not a past the British wanted to freeze. The core reality, he says, was British military occupation.
He ends with some broader reflections on science, purpose.
Yeah, science transforms the world, but doesn't give ultimate meaning or self-control. He hopes biology and psychology might help us understand ourselves better, but worries we might destroy ourselves first.
A need for balance between science and reverence for the unknown.
Something like that. Life is joy and sorrow. Internal conflicts are often the worst. We need peace with ourselves and our environment. The ultimate purpose might be unknown, but we have nearer goals we can strive for.
And his final thoughts on India itself.
He sees India needing to find its own way, again, avoiding blind tradition and slavish imitation of the West. India needs to engage with the modern world, but authentically.
Growth has to be homegrown.
Rooted in the masses, building on the past but creating something new. He quotes Emerson warning against imitation.
Does he sound optimistic?
Ultimately, yes. Confident India will rise again with freedom, learning from others but finding its own path. He believes in India's underlying unity despite divisions and sees huge potential once its energies are released. But he warns strongly against splitting the country up that would create new conflicts and problems.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive. Key takeaways. India's incredible resilience, its ancient wisdom navigating highs and lows, the complexity of foreign interactions, the rise of nationalism, the Swarajists' changing tactics.
And the long shadow of British rule, both politically and economically.
An intriguing detail for you, the listener, to ponder. How do you reconcile Nehru's picture of deterioration with his simultaneous description of deep, vibrant mass culture? Those two ideas seem almost contradictory, don't they?
They do. And also, that debate within Congress, boycott the councils or work within them, it shows the internal struggles over strategy in the freedom movement. It wasn't monolithic.
Absolutely. For further exploration, maybe dig into the specifics of British impact on Indian industry or look for different voices on nationalism during that period. There's always more to uncover.
Definitely. History is rarely simple.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.